somebody suggested this question to me, and they reference that I interviewed Francine not too long ago, maybe late last year, and I asked her who her favourite outside entity was coming into ECW. And she said Scott Hall. Now, this wasn't the first time Scott Hall came to ECW. He was just coming backstage. This was the second time after you left, and he was there for a couple of matches or whatever, and that was it. But then she also mentioned, and you know where I'm going to go with this, there was a confrontation with you and Scott Hall in the back. I'd never heard of that until Francine mentioned it to me, so tell me how that went.
Yeah, we were in Kissimmee, Florida. This is not long after I've left WWF, months. And, you know, to be fair and full disclosure, those guys had pulled an awful lot of politicking stuff. I mean, the stories that the fans have heard about the Click are renowned, right? Mm-hmm. And they're all pretty much accurate. So, again, like I said earlier in the interview, when I was talking, you know, when I go back there in 95, Scott Hall had hung around with me and Johnny in WCW for a long, most of his run there. 90, me and Marty and Sean and Dustin, of course. And so, like, here I am 5 years later, Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels, guards down, right? I mean, these are my buddies. And, you know, they went full bore at that. And because they had Vince's ear, they had, you know, control over that. And were allowed to get away with that kind of stuff. So when we're back in ECW, okay, so now this is my playground. This is where I have sort of sway. I was in the dressing room, and there's a funny little side story to this that goes along with it as well. I'm in the dressing room, and our head ticket taker comes back and says to me, "You'll never believe who's getting ready to walk in the back of the building." I said, "Who?" She said, "Scott Hall." Well, I stood right up and took my pouch off, and Paul Heyman came over and grabbed me and said, "I forbid you from touching him." What do you mean you forbid me from touching? He said, because we had a pay-per-view come up, pay-per-view with Taz where I would drop the belt. He said, if you touch him now, you'll be arrested and you'll miss the pay-per-view. So I sort of understood, you know, there's some truth to what he's saying, but, you know, this guy had, you know, and it wasn't just me in that dress. You had Tracy Smothers that they had screwed with. You had Chris Candido and Tammy that they had messed with. Bam Bam Bigelow that they had messed with. There were a lot of other guys in that dressing room than just me. And so when Paul tells me I can't hit him, I said, what if he swings at me first? He said, take him out. So I mean, I can make any man swing at me, right? I thought. So I go, when you walked in the Kissimmee building, there was a big door, garage door, and then there was a smaller door in that you would come through, and it was lower. And Scott's a big guy. So in my mind, as I'm recounting this story, I see him walking in backwards under that door and pulls it shut. And he turns around, he's eating a hamburger. And he turned around and he's like, stopped dead in his club, standing right there in front of me. Stops dead in his tracks and he goes, "Hey, franchise, how you doing?" I said, "There's a lot of fucking balls coming to this building, right? There are a lot of guys in this building you screwed." And he, you know, there was again, my impetus at this point is to try to get him to swing at me. So I had the blessing of, you know, being able to retaliate finally. And in my memory, I recall that the building went completely silent, right? Tracy was in the ring with a bunch of the kids, like he always did, working out with them. And a bunch of the Francine and Tammy and Sean and Bam or every, you know, they're all spread out around the bleachers, just hanging around. It's early in the afternoon. And I think Scott realized he wasn't getting to first base with me, so he started looking for friendly faces. And he turned over and he looked at Candido and he said, "Hey, Chris, how are you and Tammy doing?" And Chris stood and said, "Fuck you, Scott, oh, you screwed us too," or something like that, and walked up. And then Bammer is all spread out, you know, on the bleachers up there. And he goes, "Scott, what about you?" I said, "Are me and you still cool?" And Bammer stood up and pulled his tights up and started coming down out of the bleachers. And Scott started backpedaling. And Bammer put his hand on his shoulder. He said, "You're the backpedal for me." He said, "I'm not going to do anything to you." He said, the franchise is going to kick your ass. He said, "The franchise is going to kick your ass." He said, "You got a lot of balls coming here." And now there's like everybody is, you know, tensed up, waiting for this to happen. And so I'm thinking I've got to get him to swing at me or this is going to look like a really lame dance that we're doing, right? And so I started saying things to him that would certainly make me swing, and it didn't. Like he put his head down after a while, and I put my hand on his chest, put his chin. I said, look me in the eye when I'm talking to you. Again, waiting for him to throw. And so the nuclear bomb that I had to throw at him was, I asked him, I said, everybody wants to hear the answer to this question. What exactly does Vince McMahon's dick taste like? And I'm ready to block and fire back. I'm thinking he's coming. And he's looked around and put his head down and turned around and slinked out of the building. I mean, for a split second, I felt sorry for him. Like, this is pathetic, dude. Like, you just got punked out in front of a building full of people and did nothing. What I didn't know was that PJ had invited him to the building, and I had no clue of that. So later that evening, Jill, his wife, and PJ are coming to me. We're so sorry. We didn't mean to, and I didn't even realize it. So I honestly, I was mortified, because if you invite somebody to the building and you have a right to be there, then it far be it for me to say no, right? So I ended up buying them a real expensive bottle of wine and apologizing to them. But that was the deal that happened with him walking in there. And again, it wasn't, to me, you've got to be real with yourself. So like if I'm, I've been public and I've said a lot of things about Flair and Vince. These are things that I would say to their face if they were standing here. And I've said to Rick, to his face, bad me if I say, oh, no, Vince, I never said anything. I think you're great, if he were standing here. That's not like where I come from. That's not who I am. And there were those types of things that went on a lot of times. ECW, from the outside looking in at that time, for those guys, like when I went up to WWF in '95, they were all talking about ECW like this was some kind of a fight club or something. Like there was something more going on there, nefarious going on. Vince and Pat would always, and Jim Ross would always pick my ear about, why the blood and guts, and why the barbed wire, and why this and why that. And they just didn't get that was all the fluff and stuff to the angles. That was the steak on the plate were the angles and the characters and the violence to it. And they didn't get it. So there was a lot of that went on, confrontations between different guys that had been different places that would end up in an ECW dressing room. But when you looking at it for the time frame then, these guys in the business are reading in this dirt sheets then, because no internet, and they're reading about the ECW locker room beating this building up, beating that crowd up, right? And it's like, what are these crazy guys here? And there was that aura that preceded us before. Scott said to me one time in WWF while we were there, in front of the dressing room, hey Shane, we're us WWF guys are as tough as the ECW guys. You can lay your stuff in with me. You don't have to. And I was being cognizant because in ECW you laid stuff in, but I didn't want to get up there. Somebody say I'm stiff or potatoing them or whatever. So okay, tell me once, I got it. So I went to the ring that night and I didn't throw taters. I threw ECW shots. That next night, after saying that in the dressing room, he came back and complained in the dressing room about how stiff my stuff was in the ring. And I thought, like, Jesus, last night you say this, and you could knock my teeth out. If I said that last night, I ain't coming in here tonight saying that, right? But that was the dance that was Scott. And it's a little epitaph because we're at the stage after his passing away. Scott, I thought, was a good performer when he was not around that clique shit and around that politics crap. Great guy to be around. But he always struck me as somebody, and this, like, even when we were getting along great back in the, driving with me and Johnny and stuff, there was always something tragic about him. Like, there was always like something more you're waiting for him to say, and that never quite came out. And, you hear the stories now and you're like, oh, I'll sort of get something, but a shame, and gone way earlier than I would expect any of us think to be in that hole. And like I said earlier, I don't want to see any of my friends or coworkers anymore die. We've seen plenty of that.